When you clear everything else away and you leave behind all the voices that tell you what you should think, how do you know that what you believe to be true is actually true? By now, we've got used to the idea that every angel's environment reflects their own inner nature, and so we can easily understand that homes reflect the character of the angels who live in them. But it's a different idea that stood out to me as I read this chapter, almost a side note to the text. Swedenborg writes, "It may be known from the word that angels are men, since those who have been seen as men. They have homes and dwellings, and do not fly about in the air, as some think in their ignorance, which the angels call insanity." But then Swedenborg concludes, "For everyone has a general idea that angels are in the human form." We looked at this idea of angels as human back in chapter 10, and Swedenborg will revisit the idea in greater detail in future chapters, but it's this general idea I'm really interested in. He continues, "This may be apprehended if only men will think independently of their acquired notions about angels and spirits, as they do when the question of whether it is so is not being investigated or directly considered. This general idea, which is from an influx of heaven, is instantly annihilated when the question whether it is so is made the central object of thought. This occurs chiefly with the learned, who by their self-intelligence have closed up heaven for themselves and the way of light therefrom." Swedenborg's idea is that we all have an inherent notion of the truth of this, from what he calls an influx or an inflowing of heaven, but that sometimes that idea is clouded by other false ideas that creep into our thinking. Think about all the influences that have led you to what you think you know. There's sensory impressions of the world. There's the knowledge that you've been taught or learned through your own study or research. When we talk about spiritual learning, there's the Bible, of course, both as it is literally and spiritually understood, and more theologians than you can poke a stick at. And all of this is sifted through by your rationality, but even that is far from simple. Your ability to think clearly about any subject is governed more by what you want to think than you sometimes realise, and that can be influenced by whether you want something to be true or not, as well as who told you, and indeed the purpose for which you learnt that thing. So, although it's very Disney, maybe there's some truth in occasionally asking, what does your heart tell you? Certainly we can get so overwhelmed at times that it just makes sense to clear the decks and get back to basics. A simple example of this comes from the Gospels. Jesus spoke to the Sadducees in Matthew chapter 22. And he said that we're neither married nor given in marriage in heaven. And that's led some to believe that we are somehow androgynous beings in the afterlife. But can you imagine yourself without your gender? We haven't looked at Swedenborg's influence for some time, but it makes sense today to introduce this week's prominent Swedenborgian, Daniel Burnham. Burnham is known as the designer of the Chicago World Fair of 1893. He designed Selfridges in London and was among the pioneering architects behind modern skyscrapers. But he was also active in urban planning, being a key figure in the City Beautiful movement. He designed modern Chicago and Manila in the Philippines, and he was also influential in the design of Canberra, the capital city of Australia, both inspiring the design competition and being an important influence upon the winning design submitted by Walter and Marion Burley Griffin. As always, you're welcome to read along with us or read ahead if you prefer. You may have questions you wish to pose and you're welcome to put those in the comments. Enjoy the journey.